G'day, I'm Hayley from Creative Photo Folk, and today you're going to learn how to create the pixel stretch effect in Photoshop. The pixel stretch is a super effective way to add color and interest to a portrait with movement. To do this, we essentially need to sample some colors from the image and then stretch them out to create colorful streaks. Let me show you how. Now, to start with, this technique will be most effective when used with a full body subject performing some kind of motion, whether this be jumping, stretching, dancing, or running. You may wish to practice this with a stock image first, but if you'd like to shoot the subject yourself, I recommend shooting them against a plain colored background so that they're easy to cut out, and then asking your subject to perform some kind of movement. Now, to capture this movement, you will either need a high shutter speed or a fast, low-power light source to freeze the motion and prevent any blur. Alternatively, just find someone flexible who can stretch out a limb and hold still. So let's get down to it. The first thing we're going to do is make a copy of our background layer with Control or Command J, just so we have it as a reference for later. And you'll see you now have two versions of it on your layers panel. We're going to switch off the eyeball next to the bottom one because we don't need it for the moment. Now we need to make a selection of our subject, and the easiest way to do that is usually select subject. Now I know that's going to work quite well for me because I've got a primarily dark colored subject on a white background. So if I go to select and then subject, you should see it do a pretty good job. Now, if it doesn't do a pretty good job, you will need to work with your selection tools to make a better selection. I won't go into that today because making selections is a course in itself, but hopefully you have created an easy selection just like this one. Now, I'm going to add a layer mask. So we do that at the bottom of our layers panel with this little rectangle and with a hole in it. And you will see that her background has now dropped out. And I just want to make another copy of this layer before I go any further. So Control or Command J, switch that bottom one off because we will need it later. And then on this layer, the top layer, I'm going to right click the layer mask and hit Apply Layer Mask. So now she's all by herself. Now, likely you haven't done this already, but basically we want to create space in your canvas for the pixel stretch to go. So in my case, I had already done that, but for you, you will want to press the crop tool, which is the fifth one down on your toolbar, or click C, which is the shortcut. You'll want to make sure that WH resolution is selected so that you can drag out the edges disproportionately. And then you can just start pulling out extra space where you need it to go. And when you're done, click your check. I will click my cross because I've already done this step. And then just jump back into your move tool with V to get out of your crop tool. And we will need this tool shortly. What we want to do now is select our entire canvas. And we do that with Control or Command A. So you should see some marching ants around the sides. Now, really important, we want to place a check mark in your history panel next to the step you're currently up to. So if you don't currently see your history panel, you can go to Window and then make sure history is checked, and then just make a little mark next to your current step. You'll see this will be very important shortly. Now, just double checking that your move tool is still selected with V. What we're going to do next is start creating our pixel stretch. So you first need to think about what direction you want your pixel stretch to go. In my case, I want it going to the left. So I need to work with the right. In your case, think about which direction you want to go and then choose the opposite. So what we'll do is hold down Alt or Option on our keyboard, and I will hold down my right cursor key because I want it moving off to the left. So you're holding down your right arrow key on your keyboard and Alt or Option at the same time, and you're holding these down for quite some time. So if you watch the history panel, you will start to see something happening. Now you can't see this happening in real time, but it is definitely doing something behind the scenes. Now you want to hold this down for quite a long time. I'm going to let go just to show you what will happen if not. So what we are doing here is we are trying to make a full selection of these colors. Now I can't do that at the moment because if I make a selection here, then I get her in the middle. If I make a selection, here, then I will have some empty space here. So we need to extend our pixel stretch long enough that we will be able to select a full row. This is why this point is so important, because now I can scroll back in my history and just jump back to that point. If I had not made that, it would be long gone. and you'd pretty much have to start again. So I will again hold down Alt or Option and again my right arrow, and we will sit here for quite some time while I make a pixel stretch long enough. Ironically, there are other ways to do this, but they are also much more time consuming, so this is actually the quickest way. Okay, so hopefully that's long enough. I'm just going to let go. Perfect. So first thing we want to do is deselect the subject with Control or Command D. Now we want to load our marquee tool. So it's over here, second one down, and hold down your mouse on that particular tool. And we want to select the single column marquee tool. And then finding a spot where you get your full row, you can just click. What we're now going to do is press Control or Command J to put just that little strip onto its own layer. You can't even see it, it's so tiny. And then we'll switch this layer off, the one that has the stretch on it. We'll press Control, we'll make sure that our top layer is highlighted where we've just put our new selection. And now we're going to press Control or Command T for our transform tool. We're going to move our cursor over the line. We're going to hold down Shift because we want to move this out disproportionately, and we're just going to extend. Now you can't see your stretch properly at the moment. It looks really opaque. It's there, trust me. And we'll just extend that off the side of the canvas. Doesn't matter how far, just as long as it's off the canvas, and then we'll let go. Now we'll hit tick, and you'll see our stretch. Woo! So we're going to switch back on that little second copy we made of our subject earlier, the one that was already cut out and still has our layer mask, and then we will drag our stretch underneath her. Beautiful. Now, next thing I'm going to do is add a layer mask to this stretch layer. With our little Add Layer Mask button, you'll see that a white square has popped up next to it. And I'm going to reactivate her selection. So hopefully you still kept a duplicate copy of her layer with the layer mask. We can now Control or Command click that layer mask to reactivate it. And then back on the pixel stretch mask, we are going to grab a black brush. So your brush tool is this one here. Shortcut is B. And making sure that black is here. If not, you can either hit D to set it back to its default and then switch between the two. We want black at the front. So now what we want to do is paint away the stretch that's kind of extended beyond her back edges. So at the moment she's selected. So if I paint in here, nothing is going to happen. So I want to make sure that the opposite of her is selected. So we want to go to Select and then Inverse. So that means now you'll see the edges are selected. So everything bar her is selected. So then on the Pixel Stretch Layers layer mask, we will paint some black. I might have to make it a little bit smaller just so we don't accidentally, see I just accidentally erased a little bit beyond her finger. Do not want that. So just painting it away from wherever. Stretching beyond her. Cool, that looks really good. And then Control or Command D to deselect. Fantastic. Now we can start playing with the colors and vibrancy of what's going on behind her. So with our pixel stretch layer selected, I'm going to go to my adjustment layer little icon down the bottom, the half high, and select maybe levels. And pull it in, make it a little bit more brighter. Bit more contrasty. That there. And we can also add something like a vibrance layer and then pull up either the vibrance, that's a little too far, or the saturation, just to make it a bit more dynamic. Cool. Now we want to pop a background behind her, so I will again go to my adjustment layers. I'll click solid color. In her case, she initially had white, so I will keep it with white. You could choose whatever color you like. And I'll hit OK, and then I'll just drag that solid layer down to the bottom. So that is cool. Let's look at our original to see what's different. So she also has a little bit of a shadow behind her. So you may wish to do that. See the difference? Oh, I just realized that she's lost her pale there. So I can paint that back in. There we go. So to create a shadow, if you wish, this is totally optional. You would again Control or Command click her layer mask. Now we're going to create a new layer. So make sure your very top layer is highlighted and then click the new layer mask button down here on the right. It's a little plus. And then I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and choose black as the contents. So hit OK. Excellent. I'm going to drag this underneath her layer and I'm going to move it off to the right. So making sure that my Move tool is selected with V, we will start to hold down our left-hand cursor and Sorry, did I say right? I meant left. And just move that off so she's now got a little bit of a shadow. We'll press Control or Command D to deselect. And I'm going to make that quite soft. So we'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and make something about there, I reckon. It's giving us a nice soft edge. Now I only want this over the top of the pixel stretch. So again, I will add a layer mask and just paint this away from everywhere that is not, oops, making sure I've got my brush tool and my black is loaded because black paints away. Just get rid of that away from everywhere else that isn't over the pixel stretch. And then we can soften that up by making sure we drag down our opacity. So our opacity is the top right of our layers panel, and you can put your little cursor over the word opacity and a little arrow pops up and you can just drag that to the right or left, in my case, left. And you can see that just softens up that shadow a little bit. So that is that. So you can see it's quite a process, but it does give cool results. And you can now start playing with your stretch. So for example, I could highlight that layer. I could press Control or Command T. And then inside the box that pops up, I can right click and hit warp. And then I could move bits of the stretch around, for example. Something like that. You can go to town. But anyway, you've now seen the basics. Now, there is another form of pixel stretch that I would love to teach you today, and we will do that now. It is slightly more complicated, so bear with me. So now I'm going to show you how to create a radial pixel stretch, which looks a little something like this. So I've just placed my subject alone onto a new document, and as always, I'm going to now make a copy. Apply any layer masks that I have going on by right-clicking and then right-clicking the layer mask and selecting Apply Layer Mask. Now, for this one to work, we need our canvas to be a square. So we'll do that first up. We will hit the crop tool, which is C, making sure this time that one square is selected, and we'll just drag out our edges so that we have now a square canvas and hit OK. Now I've made this a little difficult on myself by having a horizontal subject. You really do want a vertical subject for this one, but it's good that I can show you how to do it if you don't have one. But for the pixel stretch, I want it to go off to the right or left. But in this case, I don't have any space. I don't want it to go up and down. And so I'm going to have to move my subject with the move tool just off a little bit to the side. So I can give them some space. I mean, this is just the copy, so it doesn't matter anyway. And I'll just click off that other layer. And now, as always, we will make sure that there is a... Oh, actually, no. We'll first make sure that our whole canvas is selected with Control Command A. Then we'll put a little check mark next to this step in the history, so we've got it as a nice reference. And then because I want my stretch off to the left, I'll be holding down my right arrow along with options. So here we go. Now in this case, I am going to have to hold it down for quite a while because I need Chucky's body in that stretch. So we will be here for a little while to get that full slice that we can take a sample of. Great. Okay, so now again, I will select my marquee tool, making sure I have my column selected and click somewhere to sample all the colors and pop that onto a new layer with Control or Command J. I will flick that other one off. And now with Control or Command T and holding down Shift, I will drag out the edges to snap to the sides of the canvas and then hit plus. Fantastic. Now we want this to be at the top of our panel. So I'm just using the move tool with V, but I find that when I pop it at the top, I do get this little bit of opacity here. So to get rid of that, I'm actually going to press Control or Command T again and just extend everything a little bit out of the canvas, but this will stuff up my effect. So what I do is press that little tick, and then I will just go back to my crop tool with C, make sure Delete Cropped Pixels is selected and hit Enter or the tick. And make sure I untick Delete Crop Pixels because I like to have that unchecked most of the time. Now, for this effect, we need to go to Filter, Distort, and then Polar Coordinates. And we want rectangular to polar, and you'll see a little example of what's going to happen in here. Looks cool, and then we'll press OK. Excellent. Now we're going to drag that below our subject and switch them back on. So as you see, it's a little small, so we will have to mess with the size a bit. So Control or Command T, and I will position it kind of where I want it, and then drag the sizing from there. Probably do want it to the edges. Yeah, I reckon that's looking pretty good. And then I want to mask it away from Chucky. So now what I'm going to do is add a layer mask to my pixel stretch layer. I'm going to Control or Command click Chucky's layer to reload that selection. We want everything but Chucky selected, so I will go to Select Inverse. Then making sure that this mask is selected, I will paint black, oops, carefully, away from under Chucky, so that the stretch is only at the top. Awesome. Now I'm going to give Chucky a shadow. So we will do that a little differently to how we did it earlier. And this time I'm going to double click Chucky's layer. Now this will only work if your subject is fully cut out, which they should be. So we'll double click not on the layer itself, but in the blank bit of that layer. And we're going to choose drop shadow. Now I have this set to multiply, 69% opacity. These are my other settings. You can play around with this to taste. And I might just go a little bit more distance there and a little bit more opacity, maybe about there, and hit OK. Now I don't like that the drop shadow is up the top as well. So what I'm going to do is right click that drop shadow layer and click Create Layer. So that just makes, and hit OK on this, that just makes that drop shadow into its own layer, and now we can mask it away. So I can add a layer mask to it and just paint away from where I don't want. Looking good. So now we need a background. So a little different this time. I'm going to add a new blank layer, drag it to the bottom, and I'm going to edit fill with white and hit OK. Now we can really see that drop shadow, and I think it's too much. So I will just highlight that layer and drag down the opacity a bit. So I think it's too, see that Chucky's hands are kind of floating now. I don't want that. So what I might do is use my move tool with V and just move it up a bit. Yeah, that looks a bit more realistic, I think. And then I may have to just paint a bit more away at the top here. So back on that plain white layer at the bottom, I'm going to double click in the blank space again. This time we will choose Gradient Overlay. And I was playing with some colors earlier. I'm not totally sold on this orange color yet, but it was sampled from different bits of the image. So to do this, you click on your gradient, and then you can double click your stops and sample what colors you want your darks and lights to be. So let's say we went with some purples this time. So that was my shadows. And then for the highlights, it doesn't really matter if they're highlights or not. They can be any color. We will go for something a little bit darker. And they're all pretty ugly, let's be honest. Maybe that. And hit OK. And then I can click reverse if I want to swap them around. I will hit OK. Actually, let's play with the scale a little bit. Spread it out a bit more, hit OK. Firstly, let's make that its own layer. So by right clicking and again going to create layer. And then we've still got that white layer, so I can bring down the opacity of this and that white layer will show through. That looks good. Now I just want to crop this again. The square is not doing it for me, so I will go to my crop tool. So we'll go with 8x10. Sometimes this requires some playing. I might just do a bit of that. And then we will obviously have to drag out that background a bit to fit. So that is our radial pixel stretch result. You can of course keep messing with that if you like. This is one I prepared earlier, which was a bit lower down, and actually I probably kind of like that a little bit better. And just for a little bit of difference, I started then messing around with my own techniques and created this cool rainbow one. And the way I did that was, instead of doing a pixel stretch left and right, I did it top to bottom. So I'll show you what that looked like. It looked like this. And then I went to Filter, Blur. It's not going to work at the moment because it's grayed out. Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. So that's what it looked like when switched on. And if we actually go into Radial Blur, you'll see I had it at best and spin at 100%. And then to make this much brighter, I used a curves where I just pulled it down a little bit. Brightness contrast, which boosted the contrast about 33%. This one made quite a lot of difference. I took my saturation up almost full and then even made that darker by bringing in my blacks. And so this was the result, which I think is really cool. I'm not sure how well this would print considering the colors are so saturated, But for something on screen, I think that is a great result and something I totally invented myself. So that's worth having a go at too. So that is how you do a pixel stretch. Pretty cool, right? So have fun with this one, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Be sure to like and subscribe so I can catch you next week. And if you have any questions, pop them in the comments. Happy creating!